can you tell our listeners a little bit about you, what your role is, and how you ended up in technology and happen to be here today?
Yeah. Um, Again, super excited to be here. So Dagi, just like almost a majority of the people that are in this field,
Hmm.
you do not have a particular path or curriculum that lands you here. There's no,
Hmm.
per se, data center architecture and engineering major, right? So I stumbled into it about 15 years ago or so-ish. However, a couple of attributes contributed to it. So, in no particular order. So, I was born and raised in Ethiopia, in East
Hmm.
Africa, in a capital city called Addis Ababa. I finished my undergrad there, focused on computer science. Happened to be selected, the few that were selected to work for the Ethio Telecom initially as a junior programmer. We get to travel and focus on implementing back then CDMA, 3G networks, payphone modernization. So I used to work for a particular group called the TPO, or Transformation and Program Office. That's
Hmm.
when I got the exposure of, let's say, dark fiber hauling and terminations, and in addition to the CCNA, CCNP side of the world, David, focusing on the infrastructure side of the packets, right? And then I happened to have the opportunity to come out here into the US and continue my education. That's when I moved to side of the Boston and focused
Hmm.
on the cryptography, or the infrastructure security side of things, right? This is when the red team exercises and all that good stuff happened on network. My first in intake or injection into the tech world was via Verizon.
Hmm.
2020 you used to have contractors to work on, terminations and all that good stuff. And then right after, I became a network IT network specialist for a commercial bank here in DMV called Eagle Bank. So I used to manage their network infrastructure. While I was there, I kept on, experimenting. I explored, and I had this niche, or a huge appetite for hardware engineering, right? Because of my the trend as well. So I got the opportunity to join the Dell engineering team. Went to O'Hare, got certified, came back as a hardware engineer. Took a lot of months of hands-on exercises. This, Dave, was when the data center industry was focusing from relay racks, if you remember,
Hmm.
or right top of rack engagements. Like we used to haul everything out into the side of the rows.
Right.
So that's the very first, like, let's say full stack deployment of an end-to-end deployment of a rack, from network and compute and storage, database, and deduplication in one rack.
Hmm.
So while I was working at Dell, the very first deployments that we did was here in the US, in Ashburn. So we get to travel here. I get to meet these folks at a place called, Salesforce. Back
Hmm.
then, what is Salesforce? What does it do, right?
Right.
Um, so this is again 14 years ago, and I had a really good relationship when we took the time to deploy the model, test it, create a migration plan for them from relays or end of row to this global deployments of um, tours.
Hmm.
And then one thing led to another. The team here extended an offer. I ended up becoming an Ohana team 14 years ago.
Wow.
Fast forward, COA member, engineer at first, focused on, like, day-to-day ops, transitioned into leadership as far as like leading some sites in
Hmm.
here and there, and then architecture team about 7 years ago, focusing multiple studies on, tools, deployment, innovation. Salesforce has a really good career programs, whether you want to take the principal route or the management route. I chose
Hmm.
the principal and architecture route, leading teams, leading projects, programs. And now I am like the executive sponsor. It's a fancy term for an architect. So
Hmm.
all of the substrates that lands in the data centers passes through. So I act like a PO at some points. I do site selection, commencement, all of that good stuff. And most importantly, recently I do a lot of thought leadership. That's how we met.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's how I landed, network end,
Hmm.
hardware end, DC ops, and then
I have I put a note down here that just made me laugh, which was as you're describing that stack, I was like, "Ooh, he's too young to be that OG." But that's true, man. It was and the way said it made it sound so elegant, but golly, it was a challenge to get all of that infrastructure. Actually, and the other thing I laughed about was, your description of love of hardware in the beginning. Nobody loves hardware except for completely crazy people. And so that's you. You remind me of my friend Rebecca Weekly over at Geico, who's also builds internet hardware. That's her expertise. But anyway, to get those engineers of those stacks, it wasn't just the hardware, but to get the compute engineers, the network engineers, the storage engineers, the substrates within them. You were talking about deduplication and the Adaband stuff. All of these things to get the teams to dialogue in a way that was helpful, right? So it could be a fully integrated system was many times as big a challenge as the architecture itself to get the compute not to overwhelm network or the network to not overwhelm storage or whatever, and make sure that that it was performing at the optimal rate for whatever the least capable of them, and to balance that whatever. But just to get those engineers to actually communicate effectively with each other, we found back in the day, so 15 years ago or so, was just as much challenge as getting the hardware to work together, whether that was VMware or Cisco or Dell or whatever in between, EMC, whatever. That was a lot,
Yeah, David, I mean, you remember there were no such thing as SAN environments. We used to do tape libraries.
right? Yeah, DASD or whatever. Yeah,
Containment used to be luxury, right? Why did
right,
you contain it? It's a 2 kilowatt rack, if
right,
that.
right.
And when we went the route of Tor, now you're creating high density racks without knowing them.
Hmm.
So, like you beautifully put it, failure domain architectures, right? How do you even switch, right? Acceptable failure, setting, and then even interacting with the vendors. We don't build brick and mortar data centers back then. We
Hmm.
were not even in build to suits, right? So if you go to a vendor and tell them that, hey, I'm solidifying it, heat rejection, static, and thermal, all that stuff became a thing at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So it was an interesting time to get into the market, but
It's a great training ground. I love it. It's a great training ground for now because the problems that you had to solve were not just technology, it was communication, it was culture.
Mhm.
It was the ability to learn to listen and as I said, and communicate, the ability to be able to express yourself or an idea in a way, you know, translating business problems into technical solutions and winning people to sort of your perspective or understanding their perspective. And so I think that sets us up pretty good for the world today, which reminds me, you've spoken about this before. You just reminded me in your journey, you helped build one of the original private data centers in East Africa and Ethiopia.
Mhm.
First of all, tell us about that. And second of all, it seems like an unusual location. Is it just the coincidence that that's where you're from? Tell me more. And before you actually answer that, somebody was just telling me the other day, they were talking about the history of the Bible. They said, one of the original oldest Bibles we have comes from Ethiopia. I had no idea. Such an interesting part of the world. I would think Israel or Turkey or these areas where so much of this, but Ethiopia was such an important part of that culture back then. So why data centers? How'd you get involved in that in East Africa and Ethiopia?
Yeah. Like you said, we already underlined the fact that I am crazy, right? So
I
whenever you
agree.
think about it, you think about geopolitical stuff that would automatically eliminate regions, especially
Hmm.
for data centers. No power, no network, right? Especially at least not reliable, right? I would say
Right.
there is, of course, but is it available? Yes. Is it sustainable? Another question.
Hmm.
Connectivity, carrier neutrality, IXs, right? So it came because of, again, an opportunity that Salesforce put forward. We call it a 111 pledge, David. It's a really good opportunity for Salesforce's employees. It's the best way to express it is as a philanthropic model. We have this model which integrates, let's say, philanthropy, like donation method of 1% of company software,
Mhm.
1% of equity, it's equity, and then
Mhm.
1%, most importantly, it's employees' time for charitable causes.
Mhm.
You have the ability to take that 1% of your time to make sandwiches or build houses. I
Mhm.
wanted to take my subject matter expertise and go and enable, right? Create this modular infrastructures in a place where you can't even fathom them, right? You can't think
Mhm.
about data centers in those areas.
Mhm.
So I took that time about 6 years ago or so, got together with like-minded individuals, also originated from Ethiopia, right? And we're like, okay, let's go ahead and make a significant impact in our SME.
Mhm.
In order to do that, we had to fly the majority of the decision makers from Ethiopia, right? There was an initiative for the delegates to actually go to Silicon Valley and see what the infrastructure looks like. Anybody can build a data center. A data center can mean anything. Like you and I
Mhm.
can have a closet connected, going, outbound, and you have a data center. So
Right.
I love to set realistic expectations, right? So I wanted to set a realistic expectation for the government because here you and I both know what our government data centers will look like as well.
Right. Right.
It's your, hyperscalers. So we did it. They got fascinated and they said, we will incentivize you if you actually go there and start a flagship or POC.
Mhm.
So we created something called Red Fox. Got together with a lot of people that wanted to create that flagship with us, right? And then we landed this modular container. This
Mhm.
modular container is self-sustaining. It is powered by solar, has resilient amount of battery backup, connected to low Earth satellites, LEO satellites.
Mhm.
And then it has a closed loop system, so you don't have to plug it into dedicated or sustainable water. So you
Right.
can technically put it anywhere as long as you have a slab.
Mm.
And then there were a lot of donations that came from other enterprises as well, like outpost racks and even the Leo side of things and fences and solar panels. And just looking at it, David, and obviously, I'm sure one day we're going to fly out there and see the capital city of Africa, the Ark of Covenants, the birthplace of coffee, all of those things that you talked about. But in addition
Right.
to that, a data center in the wild is what a couple of
Mm.
people called it. Just, no fiber, no power, no water, but it can lit up. It could be an on-site generation for hospitals and schools. 100-mile radius, you can do LoRaWAN and give them internet, right?
Mhm.
So that is what happened with Red Fox. And
Mm.
then we realized immediately, it took about 4 years, that even if you have a co-location model, even if you have a sustainable power and connectivity, getting hardware, the lead time, right? Stuff that hyperscalers face in a very minuscule manner, they face it as well. Plus, they can't afford it. So now we're like, okay, we can't give them the house. We have to furnish it.
Mm.
How can we actually build the stack? It has to be open, right? Like if they can't afford VM licenses, can it be this route? So now
Mhm.
we give them, right, specific instances or workloads. We went into that route and built the first private cloud as well. And
Mm.
that all philanthropic and giving it to like sandboxes for schools and hospitals, right, is the initiative. So right now we are like, okay, co-location might not be the case. We have to furnish it for them. And then sometimes you might even have to come into that applications realm and issue them open, right? So that is Red Fox. And it's because of the 111 philanthropic model that enabled me to fly out there. And it happened. It's one of my favorite things ever that I've done in my career.
When you first approached the folks at Salesforce, first of all, that's an incredible story. But it's sort of like you described the stack. Like there's a lot of complexity there. When you first approached Salesforce, or I don't want to make it. Let's make it more personal. Your leadership. It's a hey, I got an idea. Were they like we're on board, or did they say hold on, N okay, I understand your heart, but you listed a partial list, a ridiculously hard but partial list of the obstacles, not the least of which was getting leadership in Ethiopia on board and then getting them to get on a plane and come to Silicon Valley. Because I could imagine, Dagi, I haven't ever been involved in something like that, but in a scenario where I'm presenting an idea, my enthusiasm, my heart, I'm in on an idea, and people are like, "Yeah, we get it, but we don't have the resources that you in your individual life or in your nation or whatever have. We just don't have access to that. And so, in other words, they list the obstacles. It's difficult for them to catch a vision. Not that they wouldn't, who wouldn't want whatever it is that you're bringing, but the obstacles seem so huge. So, how did you approach, or what was that first conversation like with Salesforce? And then what was it like when you first connected, moved from that into connecting with um, leadership where you wanted to do this?
Um, at first, the conversation with myself, right?
Okay.
This is insane, right? And can I somehow avoid all of the nebulous things, right?
Right.
Have at least something structured before I go to them.
Hmm.
Surprisingly, I found crazier people upstream, and they're like, why didn't you do this earlier? Are you out of
Right.
your mind? How can we help? Right?
Right.
That is the type of leadership I had. Honestly speaking, it's like, okay, I was so, and I spent too much time in structuring it. It should have been a scratch pad. And like, this is so cool, dude. Like, you wanted to build a data center in the wild, not
Yeah.
connected, still connected, right? And okay, so it was crazier. And then most importantly, the way we talked about it initially, especially with my direct leadership and 2, 3 levels, was about the impact here, David. A lot of
Mm.
people, the minute we talk about the digital divide, they go to third world countries or, rural areas. No,
Hmm.
30% of us here in America don't have broadband internet. There are still kids
That's right.
that go to McDonald's to do their homework. It's not a fair ground with Dagi's daughters versus. So
Right.
that's why I always go back to setting realistic expectations. And then the fires, right, in Hawaii. Right now, what's going on with LA?
Hmm.
Impacts critical infrastructure, fiber, cores, distributions, APs.
Hmm.
So having this briefcase model of the shortest lead time, let's say 12 weeks, you can have a data center for your critical core exactly where you want it,
Hmm.
and you can enable connectivity, deployment,
Hmm.
right? Until it happens closer to home.
Hmm.
It doesn't make sense. It's luxury, right?
Yeah.
We first pitched this at Data Center Dynamics. Steve, he was joking about it. Like, there's people here from MIT, Cambridge, blah blah. They probably don't know what digital twin, the the actual digital divide is. You can
Hmm.
order your soft papers, from Amazon versus, so
Right.
setting realistic expectations, getting it closer to home, talking about Florida, right? Like, for instance, if it gets impacted by the next hurricane, God forbids, right? And you need to enable a school or a hospital, data migration, right? Making it solid, orderable, off shelf, and then, if possible, completely free.
Hmm.
Because what we are trying to achieve here is, Dave, I know you have years and years of experience.
Hmm.
You can lend me 1 hour to look at my
Hmm.
architecture and say, Dagi, like, you could have avoided this. What the hell are
Yeah.
you thinking about? Plus, I have this infrastructure that I'm about to send into the smelter or to liquidate. Like, okay, I'll give you the fences or I'll give you this racks. They're not doing anything. We've evolved. We're at 90 something. Okay, now we're going to send it to Florida. And,
Hmm.
and so the leadership team was like, okay, why? Like, why were you spending this much time in other places and structuring it and making it? Let's
Hmm.
go. Uh, and then the other surprising thing was the executives in other enterprises. I
Hmm.
wish I can name, right? Like some of these enterprises that you already know, this hyperscalers are like,
Hmm.
I'm not doing anything with it, but I would even pay for the logistics, which FOB. I want to be part of this movement in building a briefcase data center to narrow the digital divide became a thing. So again, unbelievable.
That's, you know, I don't often get my heart warmed. I usually laugh or whatever, but I love that. Man, if we're not working for human flourishing, what are we working for? We got to pay our bills. I have daughters, you have daughters. I completely agree. But I feel like as we get blessed with
Yep.
opportunity, and then if you're able to, you've got a talent and an intellect and a work ethic and all the things that need to come together to take advantage of it. And you take advantage of it
Yep.
to only, and I'm not a big wealth redistribution person, but I feel like once you get an abundance of riches, it is so good for the human condition, for yourself, to connect with other people that don't, and that don't have those things, whatever it is, or they're just ignorant. They don't even know that they should pursue. But in most cases, they just don't have opportunity, from Hawaii and California and rural America to other continents and other things where they have the certainly have the intellect. They certainly have the will, they just don't have the opportunity because of whatever the circumstances are. So be able to step in and rally people to your cause, um, and that they came through, that's pretty incredible. Although I am smiling, I I love it when engineers can dream, but I really don't mind if they spend a little more time than just back of the napkin, because I don't want to get on an elevator that you designed on the back of a napkin. I want you to have, I want you to have thought it through.
Yep.
But what an incredible idea. I do have a question though. Have you ever heard of the organization called Habitat for Humanity?
100%. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got to build houses a number of times. They're very welcoming. They let volunteers show up. I do it here in the Atlanta area regularly. And one of the things that's been really interesting, I know that sometimes when you go to whoever the intended audience is and you give them something valuable for free, they don't always treat it the way that I just look at my own kids, like where I had to, I didn't have any of this opportunity. My parents are, by U.S. standards, lower middle class, somewhere in there, and we're certainly not upper middle class. But just the thing, it's just a different realm that my kids grew up in than I and my brothers and sisters grew up in. And so if they didn't attach a value with something, if I gave them something of value, but they didn't attach a value, they didn't treat it very well. So I had that same idea when I started working for Habitat. And what the way they solve it is they have the people that are going to get these homes, that are given these homes. They have to work in them. They're built into neighborhoods that are welcoming. Many times the neighbors, although not a requirement, are participate. Like everybody can see the benefit of um, everybody involved. The people that are going to get the home understand the benefit, and they're working. They're bringing their sweat equity. They're bringing their time, and they recognize the benefit of a safe home. The neighbors recognize the benefit of having people that really care about their home joining their neighborhood. The people that are volunteering, whether they're providing resources or their time or whatever, they build relationships many times with these homeowners or with the neighborhood that span way beyond that small amount of time you help building them. Like you get to meet other human beings that are part of your community that wouldn't necessarily normally be in your neighborhood. So you have all of this stuff coming together, and overall, it's a wildly, spectacularly successful program. So how do you help enable people in other communities, wherever they may be, other side of the world, your backyard, whatever, in this experiment that you've had, whether it's Red Fox or others, that a data center has to be, I say this all the time, always on, as you described. You got to have access to power, has to be always available, and you solve that with low Earth orbit. But it also has to be secure as well. Otherwise, I'm not going to, I got the ideas of the whole world in there. Whatever's in that thing, I need it secure both physically and logically. And that's where that community and the people who operate that thing need to take it seriously. Like this is a big deal. So how did you work with the groups to make sure that once your philanthropic work was done, everybody embraced this as this is valuable, this is important, and we need to make sure we treat it like that.
Yeah. You said something extremely, extremely important
Mm,
for people, especially that are trying to make an impact using their subject matter expertise, David. So one, when people get something for free, they completely devalue it.
mhm,
I learned that about 4 years ago. Um, you can have this fully like end-to-end life cycle strategy architecture deployment that is going to give it to them. They would rather pay 300, $400 million to initiatives from, IMF or World Bank or USAID,
right.
right? So the way I read a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, right?
Mm,
If I treated Red Fox or did I, or even data center group stuff that we're going to talk about in the future, if I
mhm,
actually had a dollar amount associated to it, I would have avoided positive attrition. So if I capture something, it's like positive attrition, still an attrition, right? You've had a perfect example previously. Like if you took some of the delegates, this decision makers from East Africa to Silicon Valley to show them this hyperscale data centers that are seismic,
mhm.
and you go back and tell them my flagship is going to be a container, then they'll be like, no, I want that.
Right.
That is where you say, like, oh, no, 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 no. I want to set realistic. I want to make
Right.
first. I want to learn. This by itself could be $3 million because it's completely off the grid. Like, no,
Mhm,
I want brick and mortar. I'm like,
mhm,
trust me, I've been in this industry for 15 years. let's start with this. And I'm sure you're not going to feel even this up
Mhm.
for what we are trying to do. No, you showed us this. It's like almost false advertisement. I'm like, okay, if that is the case, let's secure a land, fence it, and we will introduce something called build to suit, right? Fill
Mhm.
the 6 racks first, and then we'll
Mhm.
go and here's even the architecture to end build that. Like,
Mhm.
no, you showed us a 250 megawatt data center in Silicon Valley.
Right.
That here because a data center is that. So that positive attrition is an attrition is very, very important aspect that I learned. The
Mhm.
second is the more you give TORs or white papers for free,
Mhm.
you will spoil the market because somebody from, the consultants, blah, blah, do not see that impact or that digital divide initiatives and they want. So it is a very thin line and it's very difficult, right? And of course, we felt like initially that notion, not knowing the geopolitical relationships and the hurdles, the lobbying that you have to face, made us actually change from a physical infrastructure to the cloud,
Mhm.
right? Availability here as well. Like most
Mhm.
billion-dollar enterprises still face supply chain lead
Mhm.
time, and things change, right? They're not allowed
Mhm.
to,
Mhm.
but they can't afford it there. So okay, if Dagi gives them a container, it's not enough, and the team, right? The group. And then now we have to give them furnitures. It's not enough. Now we have to give them applications. It's not enough. You give them the app and then you still have to support it, right?
Mhm.
So what I have focused now is okay, it's a life cycle, it's an experience, blah, blah, blah. However, um, realistic expectations, positive attrition is an attrition, right?
Mhm.
Failure, you get tracked and you come back with this as a service model, right?
Mhm.
Imagine you and I trying to go to this, it doesn't have to be Africa or this is like a more digitally divided place and say,
Mhm.
hey, metal as a service or everything as a service, you know?
Right.
Then they were like, I want brick and mortar data centers. It is very difficult, David.
Yeah.
So again, it's a tough role.
So if you were to do something like this again, will you do something like this again somewhere? And two, what do you do differently next time that you've learned from this first experience?
Oh, I love that question. The answer to your first question is broadening your lenses.
Mm.
I had to scope it out a little bit, right? I was super focused on even an area, right? The deployment, the arc. I was super focused on the data center aspect of it rather
Mhm.
than the why I was doing it in the first place, right? So Dagi 6 years ago, even convincing the people that helped build Fox was let's build a modular data center and like it's like we did it. However, okay, now you have a McLaren, but there is no highway.
Right.
You can't, where's it? So digital infrastructure is okay, buying a Bugatti and you are trying to climb a high.
Right.
So I learned that. So now what I would do, I would broaden my lenses. And then you always have to talk to them about the why. Why is this important, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
understanding it. And awareness. Are you aware, right? And then this is how much it's going to cost you. Even if zero cost, like I told you, causes positive attrition, right? And then especially when you work with territories that are super focused, there's no carrier neutrality, right?
Mm.
And then they work with like the east-west northbound critical data sovereignty things that you and I both know they don't trust you, right? What is your true name, notion? Because you're not
Mhm.
charging us, so there's got to be some data
Right.
mining and all that good stuff, right? So giving them authority, not worrying about IP, David, real things. When you broaden your scopes, instead of dealing with a particular nation, can I actually, get involved in this Pan-African, right? Like when you talk about the US, it's almost a continent, right? Like because the
Right.
notion or the understanding is the same.
Mhm.
EMEA, APAC. When it comes to Africa, right? See, just Google it. You see a single hyperscale data center there. Or why isn't AWS or GCP or Azure, like we call it the dark continent?
Mm.
It is sad. There's, of course, a region there to amplify network, but
Mhm.
why? The cheapest power is in Ethiopia. You will laugh the dollar per kilowatts there. And
Mm.
we talk about you and I always, right, about sustainability or net zero
Mhm.
carbon to zero.
Mhm.
It's day one hydro. It's the Nile
Mhm.
River. There
Wow.
is, some hundreds of megawatts that are going to be circulated back because they can't be transmitted, right? Literally, you can go and get some space. However, when you broaden, you will see like there is no IX. There's only one carrier. Yes, ISPs are there, but if you want carrier neutrality, or a metro to be connected, then it doesn't pass, right?
Hmm.
That's when I matured in that area because I know I will face the same type of situation in APAC or Latin America, right? So why don't we make it like a continental initiative? That's when you and I talked about this, the Pan-African, like let's say AI initiative. Hey, only 1% of the global data center deployment is in Africa. It's so sad. And nations cannot, afford, right? Because they're still in a lot of grants and.
Hmm.
So what if we get together and build, let's say, another flagship of hyperscale, East and West, geographical distribution, but everybody puts their budgets and grants for digital transformation in one bucket,
Hmm.
hire a lot of executives from the successful hyperscalers, blah, blah, and
Hmm.
then get them together in a room. We did it,
Hmm.
talked, created a model, an architecture, and then convincing those leaders to say, hey, it's because of this. This is why we put them. This is how close they are to subsea, right? This is close
Hmm.
to the POE. And then the importance of data sovereignty. David, right
Absolutely.
now, this underserved countries, and here, even regions here in the US, they're
Hmm.
super focused on availability when you and I are talking about sustainability.
Hmm.
If you're not available, you're not sustainable. Forget about it. Net zero,
Right.
really, my power goes out twice a day, and you want to talk to me about carbon to serve or net
Right.
zero cloud? So that's their situation. They have a continuous hydropower going on, but power cannot be transmitted, right? So the more you broaden your lens, the more you have to figure out. I was super focused to the data center. Now I see northbound, transmission, substations, dark fibers, and then even lobbying with the gov and showing them what data sovereignty is. Why does the importance of having like the HIPAA type of structure, keeping the citizens' data within the boundary, right?
Mm.
So again, we can again, this is a dangerous territory where we can talk about hundreds of
Right.
topics, but if it was me today, I would have broadened my lenses. I would have always started with the why, like why you need this now and what would be the impact immediately.
Hmm.
And then I would refrain from like, giving because there's the the good of doing evil or the power of doing good
Hmm.
that causes the positive attrition, right? So I will just stop there, but
Yeah.
interesting.
You keep talking about the digital infrastructure democratization. Is that a formal? I might have missed that in our earlier discussion. Is that a formal group? Is that a formal initiative?
Formal initiative. It also has a LinkedIn group of
Okay.
like-minded individuals that are joined there. It has a clear description of why we need your crap and we're going to make a change using it and
Mm.
how we're going to do it. What are we doing right now, right? Uh, I will refloat it for you, but it's got a catchy name to it. And yeah, give me your crap. Let's go ahead and make an impact. And it doesn't necessarily have to be hardware, the time. One of the reasons why I'm on this call, right?
Mm.
Why you see me in the majority of like the tech talks or this thought leadership impact is
Hmm.
take people away from like, liquid cooling or immersion, right? Like people are so fixated on it where,
Hmm.
hey, like let's focus on availability before sustainability in the real world. People are literally lacking this digital highway before we talk about the Bugattis that goes on the highways,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
because that industrial gap, you're going to see 3 and 6 very soon.
Mm.
Leapfrogging is not going to work anymore.
Hmm.
So again, Didai is yeah, real its own.
Mm.
It's just a place to collaborate ideas.
Yeah. I knew this was going to happen. Like I got 40 things I want to talk about. We're going to run out of time. So let's just pivot here for a second. I'm really interested in, so you've been at Salesforce for a while.
Yep.
Salesforce, very famous software as a service provider. Um, they have as you're going through the disruption that all of us are going through. I'm a data center operator. We provide the safe places for operators to or our customers to come and operate in them. Some of the hyperscales out there, like a Salesforce or hyperscale adjacent. Sometimes you own and operate your own data centers. Other times you land in other people's data centers. As you're going through this world, you guys have acquired other organizations. You're going through this disruption like the rest of us. Like, how is this? How are you guys? How is this impacting your data center strategy, I guess? Do you have a strategy? I'm sure you do. And how is all of these things, whether it's GPU deployment or it's acquiring through M&A, whatever, how's this impacting your world?
Um,
You got 60 seconds. It's
I know.
simple. Make it simple.
Mega
I'm
so full
I'm
full total.
teasing.
Yeah, so yes, we do have a strategy.
Hmm.
Strategy shifts, right? The only
Yeah,
constant is change.
right,
Um, it becomes extremely complicated because we are notorious when it comes to M&As. The beginning of the call, you said sometimes we even M&A clouds that exist in public cloud, right?
right,
I mean, come on, our logo is the cloud, right?
right.
So I love, like, I have 14 years building
Hmm.
infrastructure, innovating within, most secure, very minimal, like if there are any outages in over a decade, right? Now, are we shifting? Yes, it is public. We have this beautiful public cloud infrastructure called Hyperforce. It's a vehicle. You can now, it's think of it like a Roku on steroids kind of deal where you have your security, your scalability, your compliance, your data redundancy, and your agility, right? But it is, think of it like a cloud native or multi cloud intake, right?
Hmm.
So, do we have now instances in public cloud? Yes. Do we have a successful roadmap to lift and shift, right? Diversify, give our customers this extremely resilient and secure environment in public cloud, in addition to first party or on-premise? Yes. Are there drivers in doing so? One of the things that is what you brought up. Natively, there might be M&As that are on public cloud. Or the clear issue with supply chain. Our bread and butter is not brick and mortar data centers. We are a software as a service company. We're not an
Right,
IaaS, right? Just like most enterprises that you and I know.
right.
So even if we have massive deployments globally in co-locations or build-to-suit sites, I need to have a vehicle that can literally lift and shift into this. That by itself is a huge capability
Yeah.
while having your homegrown AI, while you have agents. I mean, I'm pretty sure by now about Agentforce
Hmm.
and Amstein, our AI, right? And like you said, this notion of growth, learning, inferences, right? Where do we deploy it? Right? Like your ineligible organizations, right? How do we keep them? Price, cost to serve, time to market analysis, right? So that is what keeps me up at night. It is
Hmm.
exciting, right? But there is always a solution. And then this proactive natures of order. If you and I were having this podcast 2 years ago, 50% of it would have been talked about supply chain, supply chain,
Mm.
supply chain. Right now, it's like, okay, what are we going to do about, GPUs and AI and cooling and all that good stuff? I mean, do you even care about it? Right? Where?
Mm.
So just being flexible, right? Being realistic and flexible is very important, but we do have a really good vehicle to summarize, Hyperforce. We have a really good deployment methods. We're still in on-premise data centers. I mean, we still have over, 50 some
Right.
point of presences, regions. However, we are also in public cloud, right? Significantly.
How do you prepare for the uncertainty, whether that is GPU racks or CPU infrastructure, whatever it is? There's a lot of talk right now about how we're going to do this. So as you as a engineer, a planner, a thought leader in your organization, and you have the disruption, the speed and the scale of this disruption that's coming at you, how do you form a plan, but it's loosely held? Do you know what I mean? Like I have, I got to have a path that a direction that I'm pursuing. But whether, in the past, like you said, a couple of years ago, it could be a supply chain disruption, whatever it is, as I'm acquiring organizations, as I'm deploying um, technology, how do you both have a standard that you're going for and a flexibility to adjust your standard at the scale and speed that we're moving at? I'm fascinated to ask other organizations. I know how we're trying to do it, but how is Salesforce trying to do it?
A very good question. I would actually like to get into how enterprises like Salesforce, in addition to Salesforce, are dealing with this.
Okay.
We've had multiple conversations with enterprises like ours, right? So the only instance where Dagi would look at the what before the why would be uncertainty, because the unknown unknowns cannot be measured, right?
Mm,
For instance, when supply chain problem happen, you don't say why supply chain problems, like what is a supply chain, right? Problem,
hmm.
right?
Right.
And what is this particular, so that, for lack of better terms, is the only place where you would see Dagi focusing on it. Now
Mm,
I realize that now I immediately go back into the why. When I say why, I literally focus on my bread and butter. You need to know your DNA. That's what I
mhm,
always talk about when I get on, like, let's say, tech talks or panels, which
mhm.
is there is no template. David, where if you talk to the product owner of data center infrastructure and architecture at Meta versus Google, it's completely different. One is a SaaS, the other one is an IaaS.
Mm.
So, in short, what I'm trying to say is they're infrastructure as a service enterprises. Infrastructure dictates capacity.
Mm.
For us, my bread and butter is the software. So, capacity dictates the infrastructure. If there is no major AOV customer, or if the sales did not happen, or if we don't have a product that needs to kill in a region, I'm
Mhm.
not reacting. I'm not allowed to react. Most enterprises are not like that. So the capacity drives me. So it is unfair for me
Mm.
because I might have, let's say, 52 weeks to go out into APAC and find a site, connect it, precast it, build it. Preferably if, let's say, a co-location exists, right? Run, hold it, dark fiber to a POP, right? Right? Talk about circuits. So versus the IaaS, right? They have a 5-year roadmap. They go and do their commencements, buy a land, talk about incentives, and flood their data centers. And they go
Mhm.
out as a. So, very first thing I say is that. And then I identified who I am. In addition to that, now focusing on Salesforce, okay, I know how things are going. I don't have any space problems. Per power is an issue.
Mhm.
But if I have power and space, by the time I want to deploy it, the life cycle of, let's say, this longest lead time items like busways or
Mhm.
even switches, right? 30 to 50 weeks, if you
Mhm.
remember. Um, how are they going to discourage my business, my customers, right? So
Mhm.
I need to be flexible on, okay, I can get you in public force as public cloud as long as I have this vehicle, but it will be at this
Mhm.
versus you can wait, right? And then I can, so that model had to be created. Consolidation had to happen. You and I joked about it. What are you going to do with all of this space? Even on your panel,
Right.
are we going to create like this indoor soccer fields or ice hockey?
Right.
Because
Pickleball.
yeah, 40, yeah, pick a ball, right? For, like the ratio is like 40 racks to one kind of deal. Most
Mhm.
integrated racks are from 36 to 480 right now.
Mhm.
Megawatt to rack discussions that we had, right? So
Mhm.
it's not again no nebulous anymore or an aspiration. It is happening. So
Mhm.
what am I going to do with like the other 20 to 40,000 square foot that I have in a co-location, but I
Mhm.
only need 9 racks? Is it even allowed? How beautiful pass-throughs used to be in the past, and now decoupling power and space is advantageous, right? So this specific conversations happen, but I always attack the why. Okay, this is what happened, this is
Mhm.
why, and this is the impact. But you have to be clear, candor, sometimes even very, very emphatic when you talk to your supply chain, procurement, and even the vendors. We're figuring it out. So again, even the data center providers have to understand. And then
Mhm.
while we're working on this availability issue, you have sustainability mandates. You have the sectors. You have, net zero initiatives, benchmarks,
Mhm.
right? Grid. I mean, Dave, the issues here in Loudoun County, where you can't even get it. You're starting commencement, but it's not transported. Yes, it will be alleviated, but in the meantime, as a SaaS company, what are the consequences, right? These are what I call the propellants for SaaS companies to actually revert their mission or strategy to public cloud. The why.
Right.
At the same time, I have an innovation arm, the hardware innovation and technology side, where, okay, because high performance compute, like you and I talked about it, is not always AI. The current SKUs of a CPU draws 500 watts per, a server can draw a kilowatt. You have 48, so the rack by itself with zero GPUs is close to 50.
Mhm.
How do you handle it? You and I talked about this hybrid environment of deployment, right? AI rack next to an HPC rack, right? Like a liquid cooling environment within this brownfield enablement is another web, right? So again, all of these things have to be. You need a strategy, you need a team, clear communication, you need a fund, or else most SaaS companies are going to end up in public cloud, right?
Right.
You have an eligibility. So that conversation need to happen. That's why you see me almost every quarter at a stage, right? Just to
Right.
understand, from other enterprises and other peers.
Yeah. I also just a side comment before I ask my other question was is you don't just speak on the panels, but you also sit in the audience and listen. Like so one of the things I appreciate is that people, um, you know, when they're humble enough to just sit and listen. You may not agree with the idea that's being presented, but to sit and listen and allow yourself to think through what are these other people with their other experiences experiencing, and consider it. So many people show up at these things, they just say what they want to say, and then they leave
Yep.
instead of, and I'm not trying to be critical of people that have a short amount of time, but to make yourself available to sit and listen. One of my favorite people that does that is Craig over at Oracle. He will sit and listen. He may be mumbling at the table like, no, no, no. So it still makes me laugh. And that, big critical thinkers, but you are in this group as well that I'm listening, I'm paying attention to what's going on, not just in my particular speaking um, panel, but I'm trying to listen and learn in these different areas and consider it. And I think that helps you, keep a pulse, not only keep a pulse on, but keep your mind fresh on what's possible.
Yeah, Dave, David, we have a responsibility as well, right? Responsibility of setting realistic expectations.
Right.
You did the same thing as well. You were sitting there. That's why you and I joked about the Airbnb of a data center, right?
That's right.
That's because you were there and sitting. The reason
Right.
somehow corrected that hamburger model, I
Hmm.
forgot his name in your panel, one of the panelists, and I told him, dude, there are enterprises that actually have smoothies, right? So
Hmm.
everything is meshed. That full stack deployment that I told you, like it's not a compute rack, it's not an AI rack, it's an everything rack. So
Right.
again, those type of humilities come from listening.
Hmm.
And then when you, especially, this is one thing that I know you do it, but most thought leaders have to think about is please do not encourage this silo approaches, right? People think that, like because you and I deal with like rack company, a cabling company, a chiller, generator, blah, blah, right? We tend to focus on this individual silos and we do a really good job at it.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, my life cycle or like my lead time is 1 week. Yeah, but that rack is not going to connect to the busway. Even if the busway is there, the switch is not there. So instead of a data center, look at it as a network of data
Hmm.
because my CTO is not going to say, no, it's like the data center is down. The
Hmm.
data center is not live or in production. He's not going to say, oh, do you think we're going to talk about the chassis of the generator or the relays or the IoT devices or the BMS? Oh, I'm not doing an ATS load running. No,
Right.
so that's why when I see like, oh yeah, I'm doing this and ducts and look at my submersion. Okay. So I would love to start anytime, like the next PTC, can you imagine, or data center dynamics or DICE? People say like, hey,
Hmm.
what is the shortest lead time today? Well, just that. It's
Right.
like, your safety board that shows zero incidents for the past 50 years.
Right.
Like, okay, 2024, the shortest lead time that the leaders agree on was 52 weeks. Like, let's say I give you a PO till that white space is built. And
Right.
did we improve that? Anything below that, they need to understand, unless you're an IaaS company, my CTO or CFO are going to like, Dagi, like, I trust you. You're the guy that is architecting this. But
Right.
you, because time to market is extremely important than cost
Right.
to serve. Do you think it's cheaper to lift and shift? No, it's not,
Right.
but it will be deployed today. So that, and I've seen you do it, right?
Mm.
And I'm like, yeah, they will take you there. I'm like, look at my lead time. Yeah, but you are a cabling company. The switch is not there, right? It doesn't matter if it's there. Like, at least
Hmm.
we figured it out. It will not, yeah, but power is not there.
Hmm.
So somebody needs to, right, collaborate and literally show them the end-to-end life cycle till that application is running on that server.
That's right.
That sucks, Dave. Like, still, we need to do the software world is doing a really good job at it. Like, they collaborate, they are open. We don't measure, right? You can't question them. A person can come up and give you statistics, right?
Right.
Measure it. The unknown unknowns cannot be measured. That's
Right.
why I told you earlier, like the only place where I start with what is that? Like,
Right.
so today, yeah, like New York in March, I'm sure I might see you there as well. When
Mm.
one of the things I want to focus is realistic expectation work. Like every time I go to their booth, tell them like, have you talked to that guy, right? Do you know that there's a way? Can we share? There's plenty in the market. And then so again, my focus is shifting every time, David, and we need to pull them out of their silos. Like, you're just
Yeah.
adorable. Talking about sustainability when you're not available is adorable, right?
Right.
Right. That's I even said it one time they quoted it. I'm like, yeah, but yeah, let's figure it. I love it. I'm a day one net zero today.
Right.
But, however, we're still offsetting.
Right.
Is there a realistic way to on-site generate, right? Yes, we understand it's region-based, right? But I want to avoid more than I offset.
Right.
How much does it cost me? By the time I have the strategy after I lifted and shifted into public cloud, I would be an idiot, right? So
Right.
that's why realistic expectations always underline.
Well, one of the challenges I think when we have a group of introverted engineers is this, what you've been describing in a way I think about it is there's in addition to the hard science part of our brain of algorithms and heat rejection and physical infrastructure and connecting them together is back to the philosophical, which is why. And there are times in certain circumstances, we isolate. Like if you're sick, we might isolate you and put you in the ICU. If there's a thing I'm trying to do maintenance on, I might isolate certain things. But we know that human beings flourish in community,
Yep.
systems flourish in community. I might isolate certain traffic on an out of band or whatever, but I'm putting all the out of band in these certain areas, or isolate access. But I build a community of out of band. I build a community of these other things. And when we're able to do those things, other than these extreme circumstances that exist on occasion, so we build a temporary isolation matrix, whether that's, you can imagine 100 different ways you apply that. But for us, as in our industry in particular, it's sort of opposite of. I have a lot of artists in my family. Almost all of my daughters are artists. My wife is an artist, which means I always have a messy house, but it's really creative. And they're the opposite of me in that, man, they love collaboration. They love these things. They do all of this other stuff, but they don't often have a plan. That's great collaboration, but what's our plan? So it's this marrying of the plan of the what, the how with the why. And one of the things we're trying to do in our organization, we're lucky in that we came from an IT stack. That was our managed services was where QTS really started. And so we had to learn these skills of communication and delivering that why to our internal conversations, our external conversations. And as we've evolved with technology and products and services, it's served us well because we onboard people with that in mind, whether they're an accountant, they're security, they're an engineer, electrical, IT, doesn't matter. When you and I have talked about this before, I just kind of want to pivot then. So you're trying to get these electrons to serve your customers as fast as possible with realistic expectations. When you onboard people or you bring people into your world, or you just influence those around you with practical training, how do you add how do you mesh these things, both the skill set that I'm trying to, get you to do with whatever your area of expertise, network, compute, cloud integration, whatever, with this philosophical stuff that we've been talking about. How do you see the role of practical training incorporating all of those things?
Um, for me and my, ICs or um, it is I would start with trust, like even
Mm,
Salesforce, right? Like so right now, um, especially to be mindful of people's time and in
hmm
extremely fast-paced evolvement,
hmm
you have to trust. Like I have to trust my compute, network, storage, deduplication, security, right? And then y- you have to know how like the sausage is made. You don't have to spend too much time in it as
hmm
far as like, the impact it's going to make. Let me
hmm
take you back, for instance, in when we moved from relay to Tor, right? If I was like selfishly focused on enabling the rack configurations and the density, and I didn't focus on the blast radius of putting both Tors within, and you lose a rack, you lose the entirety of the stack, and why
Right.
to do like the load distributions and and if I don't listen to my DMZ people, my landing people, the firewall distribution VPNs, right? So creating that synergy and completely trusting them,
hmm
right, is extremely important. Again, treating it like a vehicle. A SaaS company is very difficult, David. And initially, it used to be very difficult to actually convince because it's always the app. The app is prioritized, right?
hmm
ERM is prioritized. The ERP might be prioritized, right? Meta, I guarantee you, it's Facebook. However, the people like how do you run it? Bringing them in, bringing your leaders, and actually giving them the tour of the data center, how critical it is, right?
Mhm.
Like the physical security, because sometimes you transcend. Your systems engineer, your application, your developer is focused on the sandboxes, right? But in order to create that space, that elastic nature of growth so they can innovate, why data center mean something and why it's critical, why it's important. Everybody freaks out when they see you on the news when you have a downtime.
Mm.
We don't glorify it when you have uptime. How do you measure it? Realistically, right? You shouldn't expect me, again, people talk about like uptime and tiers. I know, Dave, you and I hate it where like, okay, yeah, yeah, 5 nines. Yeah, but there are completely like I have different sectors of
Right.
distribution, acceptable natures. And so when auditors and compliance people come and literally try to use the same sort of like benchmark
Mm.
to
Right.
teach this, a lot of exceptions made on this particular site, you need to be, mindful, not as much emphatic. Like I have to take off my engineering hat and like, political hat on and make sure that I'm not too intimidating. But trust, communication, bringing them in, let them touch it, let them feel it and how grand it is and how impactful it is, right? A lot of people still look up when you talk about the cloud,
Mhm.
surprisingly, right? It
Mhm.
is something that we created, right? It's just bring it
Right.
over. Um, it's very hard to visualize unless I have, again, we will get to it towards the end of our podcast, I'm sure, but the importance of digital twin right now, you and I lived in the world of DCIM,
Mhm.
tracking, visualization, thermal, all of this good stuff. But
Mhm.
right now, when I'm looking at a land, literally deploying the actual layer one and layer two designs and do
Mhm.
failure domains and switching, even for builders like you guys,
Mhm.
brownfield to greenfield change, the impact of an AI rack in an air-cooled data center. Now I can
Mhm.
literally bring in a model and see it, see the temperature, humidity, right? The load, distribution, static, there, right? So I wish I had these tools before, but people don't talk about them. What are they? Why are they important, right?
Mhm.
Because now I'm trying to use AI to create efficiency because I love
Mhm.
building data centers and I want to build them in-house, right? While I'm focused. So because of that is why, again, that data center guru initiative started, where, okay, even the education piece, David, we had this conversation with Microsoft on one of the panels, Black Box. There were a couple of people, even Meta. And data center trainings are not sexy,
Well,
but
not with that attitude. Come
they're
on.
they're not like you take and then we are literally like baptizing an electrical engineer or a submarine technician or a mechanic. I'm pretty sure you
Right.
have a bunch of them where
Yeah.
I want, like a computer engineering major or an electrical engineering major to have like a second, focus on critical infrastructure builds, right?
Hmm.
And it should not be as manual these days where I can literally help him build this strategic model with objects and he can run it. Just like how a software guy writes a code and he sees a bug and he
Hmm.
actually solves it. You don't immediately give him the grant, even if you know the answer.
Right.
Some similar things are happening right now in a digital twin space where you give him the coordinates of the space. He needs to know how he's going to lay it, right? From the substation, from the gear drops to the ATSs, to the gen, to the UPS, to the PDU, whether he needs RPPs or UPSs, it comes, or busways, to the rack.
Hmm.
All of this can happen. Troubleshooting your MEP guys. Right
Hmm.
now, you can literally give them a cat generator and create an intentional failure. Like it could be a fuse
Hmm.
or a trip, right? A CT problem. And then just like a Minecraft game, David, like if like, you put on the headset to lower the decibels and walk through and open
Right.
the key, and it wouldn't allow you. It's an error until it
Right.
figures it. And that's how you can even test during your interview.
Right.
And, I'm not going to care about your 10 years of experience. I will give you a digital twin experience, fix the problem.
Hmm.
So, and then even sales, marketing. Imagine if you guys, let's say you have this availability and I don't have to come and look at my wire map, your, UPS, the catchers and all that good stuff. You can show me. You can create a scenario. So I wish these tools existed in the past. I'm glad they are here now, but we have
Yeah.
a lot of jobs to make sure, a lot of job. We have a lot of job to make sure that the people understand it, Dave.
Yeah. It's almost like a flight simulator. It's kind of one of my favorite things these days, where you can, you know, I'm not trying to say it replaces the actual experience of being in the cockpit, but you can get so much benefit from simulating circumstances without putting your life in danger to to begin to build that professional intuition, whether it's the harmonics of hearing something or visual cues of seeing something, you get exposed to it in a real life scenario or as close as you can model it digitally. And especially since we manage so many things from a mobile device or whatever, like if I get an alert that on the surface could be misleading, but if I've got enough exposure to these things and I know in the context of my data center or my software program or whatever, like this isn't just a general alert, it is for this data hall or for this circumstance. And now I'm able to start building this intuition that usually comes, you not only have to have the tools, but you have to have a spirit of innovation. I know you've talked many times about innovation. So as you think about these tools, practical training, and connecting them with innovation, how do you manage that at Salesforce, or how does Salesforce think through this?
Yeah. So we have a group. It's called HITL, Hardware Innovation and Technology Lab, just for the infrastructure side, right?
Okay.
Um, as far as the funding is concerned or the scale is concerned, all of this curveballs, of course, dictate the narrative of where is it and how big it
Hmm.
is. Because if you're dealing with an M&A, there will be like resources that will be shifted. If your focus is now, Hyperforce and lifting and shifting, right? There might not be
Hmm.
as much fund to
Hmm.
create innovation, right? And then
Hmm.
knowing your nature, we're bread and butter software, right?
Hmm.
We need to spend too much time in digital twin or the next SKU.
Right.
This is where you rely on strategic partners, right? OEMs. And then my architecture engineering would be treated like an ODM, right? Can they aggregate based on this? Can I have unique, right? So again, it's just if that is your bread and butter, then you need to find this OEMs and treat them like ODMs and give them architectures, still motivate people to create internally.
Hmm.
You're one of the number one innovative companies, right? Like significantly for years and years, right?
Hmm.
As far as innovation concerned. But people immediately think apps, right? But as
Yeah.
far as resilience is concerned, we're also innovative. However, the fund changes realistically, obviously, right? Because imagine if you were leading the technology sector and I come to you about this major investment, perpetual license to do observability, IoT in all of our fleet, right?
Hmm.
Over 60 co-locations globally. And
Right.
this how much? And he'd be like, but Dagi, I'm lifting and shifting, and my focus is M&A. I can't argue with you. I have to help you because time to market makes significant
Hmm.
amount of money, right?
Hmm.
So, I used to be wet behind my ears. Now I'm like, okay, if this is mine, how do I
Hmm.
help? Security is extremely, extremely important, David. I'm
Yeah.
sure you are monitoring some of the things that are happening via DSIM. One of the easiest ways to penetrate into your data center right now are through monitoring devices. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you have a segment or you think about talking about like, let's say, zero trust architecture, specifically on infrastructure because zero trust is so good. Like it's been 10 years in the software
Right.
world, application performance, logs, policy, right?
Yeah.
Observability.
You know
However,
where I heard, sorry to interrupt, the craziest thing I ever heard, I believe it's true. I haven't fact checked it recently, but somebody was talking about an incident at a casino, and the way that the casino was penetrated was they were having some work done on their aquarium. Their aquarium was this really cool aquarium, had a router, and they didn't put it in at a band or a zero trust network. It was the aquarium people
yeah,
and the IT person, no nefarious intent for the casino, just gave them an RJ45 to connect to. They connected into the switch or router, whatever it was for the aquarium while they were doing this maintenance. And on one of the days during maintenance, somebody found that thing. There's no real security on that little switch, whereas the rest of the back end infrastructure of this casino was super locked down, whatever. But that's how I believe it was through the aquarium, the router on the aquarium. It just, it was if you don't have command and control around that. But I think that serves your point of, it's not just the training. It's not just because you guys are moving at speed and scale, but the innovation. I need a philosophy of people. Anyway, we'll start a whole new podcast. So I don't want to go too far down that road, but it is, it comes back to as you're innovating, as you're doing these things, as you're trying to iterate on your way to paradise, you got to eat. I say that all the time on my show. So how do I, without making myself vulnerable, again, data centers got to be available. got to be on. They have to be secure, logically and physically secure. Um, it is if you don't have that in your culture, if it's not just from training, but it's a philosophy, man, we're moving too fast and we're moving, um, you know, whether it's acquiring through M&A or whatever it is, those of us in the digital world, you have to keep the more doors you put on the walls of the castle, the more opportunities there are for penetration. It just takes one. And so I love that you guys spend time thinking about that.
There is one important thing because you just opened up a can of worms here. Like I
Oh
was
boy, here we go.
1 minute here, right?
Yeah.
So it worked. I had this discussion with multiple enterprises like us as well. When you have especially this unknown, right?
Hmm.
The very first thing you have to do is again, availability matters. We talked about sustainability, right?
Hmm.
There's this between availability and sustainability, there are these important three attributes, David, that strategists need to focus. First one is whatever I'm talking about, is it viable? Viability, right? I'm available, but is it viable? The second one is it orderable, right?
Hmm.
Under it, can I afford it?
Hmm.
Right? Or and then the third one that a lot of people are not focusing on is it supportable? So viability or orderability and supportability, right? Sustainability for you and I'm pretty sure it's not that greenwashed approach of like net zero.
That's correct.
Sustainability is can I sustain my data center, like minimizing outages and uptimes and all that good stuff, right?
Mhm.
So why did I mention if it's not viable, by the time the PO is cut, they spend their time to order it, and by the time it lands, it is ready for a refresh, right?
Right.
That 12 kilowatt rack became 40 kilowatts. And then what am I going to do with it? You get so this that's why I said 40 years, 5 years ago, my conversation would have been different, is because we used to be aggressive as far as proactively acquiring space and power back then. You know
Hmm.
how hard it was to get a megawatt in EMEA? We used to go to this uncharted territories and create business units, Dave, to even co-locate like 5, 6, 7 meg. Right now, things change and they're like, power did not change. They have a bunch of space. Like, well, here, build to suit like 10 years ago or so. Why did we attack it? What is the impact, right? How can we scale the commencements but is it viable?
Hmm.
And then again, M&A, it's not just the enterprises, but this bigger cats eating smaller cats, and
Hmm.
their culture is different where deprioritizing, right? Cues change as well. So again, another subset to discuss, but that that path is very important. Viability or durability and supportability. Uh,
So how do you maintain? I love that you just mentioned culture there. That's probably the single most important thing in our world. I say that all the time, and my team will, safety is the most important. I agree. Everybody that comes to work needs to the degree that we have control over it, needs to go home with all the parts of them that they brought. Completely agree. Um, communication is all of these things, I would wrap those all in an umbrella of culture, like who we are, what's made us successful. So how do you imagine Salesforce with all of the technology that we're talking about, whether it's innovation or training or merge and acquisition, your world, it's changed a lot in 14 years. It'll change a lot more in 14 years. But how do they protect their culture, not the technology, but their why? Why we do what we do? How do they make sure that we're keeping that vibrant and alive?
Brutal transparency.
Brutal transparency. I love that.
Yep. Trust. I mean,
Mm,
trust, like we even always start with trust, right? Like
hmm.
Ohana is there. I'm sure if anybody that knows about Salesforce is about its people.
Right.
So that, the people factor is there, trust is there.
Mm,
Trust specifically on our customers, right? They need to, that's why you don't see us on the news about like downtimes and all that.
hmm.
So we spend a lot of money, resources, finding the right people, right? And people are candor here. I can be emphatic in front of my leadership, and they know that this is not passion. This is just, I'm not passionate about it, or I don't want to bore you with my technical, tactical ability. If
Hmm.
they see me, like I told you about this hat, if I'm not brief, my manager would buy me 3 or 4 books about brevity and like, nah, I need it now. Like we're going down the elevator, right? So, and then look at it like this is yours. Like, don't focus on cost to serve. I'm a TTM company. I'm a time to market company. Like if you come up with an architecture strategy that will save me billions of dollars, but it takes me 52 weeks where I make 4 billion a month. Come on.
Right.
So this is why I meant like they need to be brutally transparent when it comes to me. And you have to trust the culture. And then generation changes, right? Like,
Hmm.
can you imagine like the dealing with again the different sectors and people and all of your attributes? Because if Dagi is brutally transparent and uncandor, remember that positive attrition where you let them go, sometimes they freak out, where like Dagi does not care. I'm like, no, I'm trusting you, trust me.
Hmm.
Last thing you want is Dagi to come and review your architecture. If I'm
Hmm.
not there, that means you're doing a good job, kind of deal.
Right.
It's not something that I developed without learning from my upstream. Again, leadership, the true separation of your architecture or even technical substrate from managerial substrate, and the mesh, the trust between those two
Hmm.
is very important. And let's step aside from quickly from the internal enterprise, right?
Hmm.
Peer reviews. And that's why you see me on this talks is we grab coffee and talk about, okay, how are you doing it in Alphabet?
Hmm.
Meta, right? Oracle, the peers talk. And you have that trust also is cross-organizational, where
Yeah.
you can talk to me, you can trust me about an initiative and pick my brain. Have you done it in the past?
Hmm.
Like, yeah, why did you do it? What did you learn, right? Like what we joked about in where, okay, yes, did anybody really land a true direct-to-chip deployment in an air-cooled data center with a
Hmm.
redundant fashion from the CDW? Who's the plumber? Can you give,
Hmm.
don't we? Like you go to
Right. Yeah.
next door and you say, do you have a best plumber?
Right.
Insured, right? Who is insuring a $500 million rack
Right.
plumbing today, right? I need somebody kind of deal. These
Hmm.
are these trusted spaces. Discipline is important. Dave, I know I'm sure there are some individuals that should be like, okay, just like a relationship, right? So
Hmm.
they expose you, they educate you, right? I wasn't like this when I started, right? So a lot of investment on culture and education as well, brevity, brutal transparency, and internal and external, right? So I know it's a lot of things, but
Yeah.
they
I
balance.
I love that insert trust instead of suspicion. I mean, that's a mantra of ours as well. It doesn't, there are times, we're human beings. There are times we don't even live up to our core value. It's uncommon. We've got them. We know what they are. Um, but my favorite people in this data center and adjacent industry are those that you just described that they have this cool combination of swagger
Mhm.
without arrogance. I got some swagger. I've solved some problems, but I'm also not just willing. I love to sit around the table
Yep.
and have ideas, usually off the record, but this back channel sort of conversation and be able to, ooh, that's an interesting thing. That's another way to do that dance move. That's another way to think about that. Or you're crazy. Please don't do that and hurt yourself. Let me tell you a better way to do it. And you let these ideas contend, not to divide. But there's a phrase: "As iron sharpens iron," right? You have that thing. And when it's a small world, we work in such a small industry, and that the most interesting, thought-provoking people to me that I enjoy building into my personal network, they're not just the big brains that can solve mathematical equations, although I love that. But they have this interest and willingness to connect with other human beings. A lot of times they're not exactly like them in, their personal interests or whatever, but they have this mesh, this interconnection where they have some swagger without
Mhm.
arrogance, a little humility, and they have a good time, but they build those back channel relationships and they're able to share them. So whether it's the hyperscalers that you've talked about, and every now and then, what's really cool, Dougie, is when I see somebody get introduced into a conversation that doesn't have one of those big pedigrees. Once upon a time, you didn't have that pedigree, but they allow them at the table to throw an idea out there. And if the idea can withstand scrutiny, the next conversation happens. And many times they'll pick up that person and invite them to join their organization or at least
Yep.
in a relationship so they can begin to iterate. Like it's really, really cool to see these big personalities that have had a lot of success. And then they go live this out. And then they go back to their organizations and they, I think in a healthy way, infect their organization or continue to enhance their organization with the right-minded way of thinking about innovation, about practical training, about serving others, serving a purpose bigger than yourself, serving the why of what we're doing. And sometimes, to your point about brutal honesty, to be able to say, we have never deployed something like that. We've got all these digital twin models. We've got all these other things. We believe to the best of our ability that this is what it's going to be, but we haven't deployed it yet. And so, how are we going to do that? And oh, by the way, I've got to have some back channel communication because my frenemies are going to be deploying these things too, and we want to be able to in real time be able to communicate. Hey, hold on, I just put this $500 million deployment, and it almost just cost us 500 million bucks. So you should patch it to this, or rejigger this, or change something like that, just to give you a heads up. And the organizations, I think, that have that philosophy, certainly the human beings that have that philosophy, are going to be the most successful in the middle of this disruption that we're in the middle of.
Absolutely. Nothing to add there. Well said.
Well, let me ask you this, because we've been talking for a bit. If you wanted to kind of, we're ending our conversation today. One, is there anything we haven't talked about that we should? But two, what do you want to make sure our audience takes away from this whole conversation that we've had today?
First, I really, really, really would like to appreciate you for making time. I know I
Oh,
shipped.
it's my pleasure. I love talking to, it's so funny when people thank me. I'm like, are you kidding me? I get to sit at the knee and learn. And I'm not a, anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on.
So that I would like to start there. And second, um, for me, what is important is impact as an
Mm,
individual. It might be career in the past, education, or maybe visibility. Once you have the microphone, you will either realize impact or scale.
mhm,
The reward is completely different, David. You will completely get knocked out when you go to bed.
mhm,
Feels good. So
mhm,
I wish this is like an urge. It's like why I want to use this realm is to please focus on impact, right? I know a lot of enterprises that are much more capable than me,
mhm,
better resources and network and years of experience. But this is an infinite loop where you can't get out of it, right?
mhm,
Unless you just transcend and look around you. And I'm like, oh my goodness, they're in the third. Like, that's why we spent about 30 minutes. So please focus on impact, right? Um, just explore, right? And I don't even, I used to think I was an entrepreneur at some point. Now I found out that I'm an explorer. Like
mhm,
today, we didn't even, I remember our agenda and the stuff that we talked about where,
mhm.
so if you ask me, Dagi, like, tell me about yourself, I'm an explorer. Tomorrow you might see me about like mining, like better efficiency or,
Right.
so be open, have integrity, obviously, right? Because people, this is again, like you said, a very small circle.
Mhm,
If you don't know what you're talking about, do not take risks because people might listen to you. Do your
mhm.
research. After you did your research, write about it. When you get stuck, you would immediately know that you don't know shit about this. I'm sorry about, but like
Okay.
go back and rewrite it, right?
Right.
So a lot of lesson learns, right? Internally, communication, brutal transparency, right? And again, going out, make an impact. And impact is not, again, to underline it
Mhm,
outside of our continent, our beautiful continent.
mhm,
Just look at your county, look at your state, look at your right nation, and look at the percentages. And we are, but especially us in the infrastructure world, David, it's
mhm.
so like it's it pains me to see all of this multi-million dollar stuff being liquidated by everybody
Right.
from all over the place, right? So
Right. We're so blessed that we've just got to, it feels gross, immoral, whatever adjective you want to insert there, to not leverage the abundance, to harvest a tremendous harvest. And man, you eat from your harvest, be rewarded from your harvest, but don't just build more barns to put your harvest in. Find a way to share. And one of the things I try to encourage people, my role now is full-time evangelist in my organization. I've had a bunch of jobs, bunch of titles, director of the innovation lab, SE, leader of SE, like a lot. I've been here a long time. And now it really is full-time evangelism. And I love it. And it just feels sort of this natural path. But what I try to convince people, especially when I talk to, so much of our community, Dagi, don't have the interrelationship experience that you talk about, that you've had and that you've cultivated. And so if I tell them, if I try to tell a story or cast vision for them that's I need it bigger than themselves, but not so big that it's overwhelming and they just feel like, look, I'm just a dot. And so I just try to encourage them, start with your neighbor. I
Yep.
guarantee you, if you look around, you will find somebody in your community not far from you that you can benefit in 100 different ways.
Yep.
And so leverage your success to help benefit your neighbor. And then once you experience that, for some people that might be as far as they go, and then you go from your neighbor and you continue to work out. And a few people are explorers like you, and it's almost like evangelism. Evangelism is I amplify a message and I go to people that haven't heard that message. And so once this people group has heard a message, receive it or reject it, I've proselytized that message. Now I'm looking for the next group. And sometimes that takes me further and further away from sort of the civilized, normal comfort zone. But it's what I'm compelled to do. What I'm trying to encourage people is you can at least talk to your neighbor in some way, right? That's people that look similar to you or they're whatever, they're nearby. It's not a different language, it's not a different continent, it's nearby. But a few of us want to just go and tell the good news and tell the message and capture the imagination of some of those people. Not everybody is built to hop on a boat and go someplace else, but a few are. But everybody can tell a story about why this is important to them and then get involved in your local space, even if it's to a small degree. 100% of the people getting involved to 0.5% or 1% would change humanity forever. And so to whatever degree we can, I know that's pretty esoteric, but look, I just
Uh,
think it's a big deal. It's part of our why. It's certainly part of my why.
no, it's well said again. I mean, if you add that other thing that you talked about, where people actually freak out when you're giving stuff for free, like
Yeah,
is in it for him. While you were like, let's say you were completely sane, you want to make an impact, and you're like here, and like one, sometimes you might even find yourself like as condescending. No, it's not
right,
because I know more or I'm privileged.
right,
Want us to have, just narrow the divide. Like, why do you think in the first place that there is a divide? It's because
right,
we're from the US? No, no,
right,
no, hold on, wait. Like data sovereignty. I'm like, yeah, you think we are not protecting our citizens' data, right? Like, so
right,
because we're talking about an enterprise or a nation, when you get out, the world is big, David.
right,
The more I explore, like I'm like this tiny, like minuscule. And then like it makes you read and you're like, their problems are completely different with our problems.
right.
And sometimes here you might have like mandates and policies that will restrict you from like nuclear power on-site generation. But there
Mhm.
are areas in there that are like, oh, let's go, come and deploy your pods, the rig. Like what?
Right,
Because late movers advantage sometimes shocks you.
right.
You have Uber and Lyft in the US, you might find like 14 of them in a very up and coming country.
Hmm.
They're focused on software, right? But I always talk to them when I go to APAC, especially, right? In Africa or Latin America.
Hmm.
I always tell them like the development in software, the apps that they create is the reason why we even outsource some of our jobs, right? However,
Right.
why aren't you innovating there? Why is most of the innovation, most of this unicorns are created in Silicon Valley? Is because we invested in infrastructure, real infrastructure.
Hmm.
There are nations that go to the 5G realm before us when we can't even boldly communicate that, Dave. In short, they don't have a highway, but they have Maseratis, Bugattis, Ferraris
Right.
landed,
Right.
right? But you can't even go to the gas station because you don't have the road.
Right.
So we, you and I, or people that are in this, I'm sure the majority of the people that are going to listen to this podcast are in the infrastructure world. We're creating data centers are digital highways.
Hmm.
The apps, depending on their scale, are your luxury cars that are not lifted. They need to be closer to
Right.
the asphalt. So that's
Yeah.
so again, like that's why I'm here. That's what I used to tell them. Normalize it, vocalize it in a way that they understand, articulate it.
Hmm.
Then I don't get affected by it now. I used to.
Hmm.
They're like, nah, you're condescending, doesn't affect me. Why are you
Right.
here? I don't trust you. Or, why is it free? No, no,
Right.
I have a 5-year incumbency with this consultant group for, $250 million granted by this guy. I'm like, but you didn't need that.
Well, Doggy, what I like about you, as I've heard you speak, and it resonates with me. I'd like to think I try to do the same thing. To put it super simple in my words, you go out into the world. You hungry? I
Yep.
have some food. If they're not hungry, Okay. It may look at like,
Yeah.
I don't mind skepticism, cynicism, as I've said before, is a challenge, but I have something I think will help you. Are you interested? And I don't mind questions on what's your motivation and what's your why, and I articulate them.
Yeah.
Many times people think I'm trying to take it,
Yeah.
in this metaphor, they're taking it, or whatever. Okay. I
Yeah.
understand. I'll communicate the best I can and offer it. And if it doesn't make sense or it doesn't work for you, okay. But there are people that are so hungry that their stomach hurts
Yeah.
or their kids have to walk to water or their whatever it is, as you translate this analogy into the digital world, they don't have opportunity. And if you're not connected to digital infrastructure, you are not connected to the economy of the world. And if you're not connected to the economy of the world or the healthcare of the world or the ideas of the world, you cannot lift. If you're wealthy, you don't care. But if
Yeah.
you're not, you cannot lift yourself out of poverty. It is almost impossible. And so we're just trying to find people that, I don't mind questioning our motive, but let's go try to find. And we will find people who are willing to receive. It might take them a moment to learn trust, as you've described it. But once they do, you get to help them. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to impose. I'm trying to offer. We offer and people receive or they don't receive. And we just move on to the next group and we offer again and offer again and offer again. And if we do that, if we're willing to do that, I think we can help the world flourish. I think it's a great place to be.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you, my man. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, more than a pleasure. Keep doing the good stuff.
My pleasure. Hey, everybody, if you like that conversation, click the like button. If you loved it, click the subscribe. We'll see you next time, everyone. Have a good one.